Welcome to the Inside Out Nutrition Podcast. I'm your host, Hannah Knoll. My goal for today will be to give you some basic fundamentals of Nutrition 101. What's a calorie, what are macros, and how do they affect composition? This will be part one of a two-part series of nutrition fundamentals geared around changing composition and still feeling great without having a restrictive mindset, understanding foods as a whole and what functions and value do they provide to our body and how do we use that to our advantage. We will be looking at calories and macros today as our start, and then next week we will dive into a little bit deeper on the micronutrient side of things. So calories are basically going to be the energy unit and the energy our body requires to function. Every food that we consume will have a certain energy output. So basically the calories of a food will denote how much energy that food item will give us. Each macronutrient, so protein, carbs, and fat, they all have calories. So all foods will be some semblance of protein, carbs, and fat, whether it's multiple of the three or a single category. So calories are basically going to be that control of our weight. It doesn't look at composition. It's simply, is our weight going to maintain? Is it going to go down, or is it going to go up? The calculation of those energy requirements or energy needs in the body has several different factors involved. We're going to look at BMR, which is basal metabolic rate, and that is essentially how much you burn at complete rest. If I've done an in-body with you, you've heard me say it multiple times. These are coma calories. You're resting completely. There's no thermal effect of food. You're not eating and then digesting and having calories burned from that. There is no non-activity thermogenesis, twitching, this movement of my hands that I'm doing right now, anything that burns calories that is not an activity, going on a walk, taking a run, lifting weights. And then you have the activity calories on top of that. So whether that is you are going to the gym for an hour or you work at an active job, you're on a job site, you are moving around. If you are also doing an active hobby, active workout, active job, then all those things need to be equated for. And then we also have genetics and we have hormone load. So there's lots of different things that go into the energy equation. So that will be a whole separate conversation. And if you are curious about what your energy requirements look like, I'd be happy to sit down and talk to you about that. However, right now we will focus on essentially the overarching principle of calories affecting weight. If we have a deficit, so essentially what happens in a deficit is our calories are lower than what our body's energy needs are required for day-to-day function. So when we have this happen, our body has to get energy from somewhere, and that has to come from our own body. So in some cases, some people are just blessed. They can eat no calories and their body goes straight toward body fat and they just lean down. This is a very, very small population, and oftentimes it is in our youth when this is going to be easier to make possible without the negative consequences of losing mass, which is the biggest problem with super restrictive diets. You take total calories to such an extreme low that we create risks for hormone function to be compromised, as well as you have no energy, you're not able to recover. But the biggest issue is sustainability and being able to keep that weight off, because what we're losing mass, because the body has fat stores to be able to protect for longevity and keep you safe. So it doesn't want to use those fat stores. When you are in an extreme deficit, it goes toward muscle mass and it will break down our own tissue, which in turn will decrease our BMR or our coma calories, because the more muscle we have, the more calories we will burn at rest. So we need to be very aware of what happens when we cut our calories too dramatically low in the hormone response as well as the compositional response. Another key part of dropping weight is we have a set point weight, so essentially where our body feels safe to be able to sit. If we drop weight very, very quickly, that set point weight hasn't changed. So our body wants to get back to a point where it feels safe and secure. So if you dropped 30 pounds in a month and a half, like on a red mountain or more of those extreme weight loss diets where they tell you don't take out exercise, you're on an appetite suppressant, or even on your own journey, if you just starvation method. If you're losing it that quickly, your body's going to fight through ghrelin, our hunger hormone, to tell you I'm hungry and we need calories, as well as anytime you go even just a little bit above your calories, your body's going to grab that and store it because it hasn't been able to get those calories prior. So it's trying to fill up and get back to its healthy or its safe state. So we want to lose weight slowly, and so that's another reason to do a moderate deficit. So we're not pulling from muscle mass, but we're also helping to reset the set point weight. So whenever people are wanting to drop 4 or 5 pounds in a week when they're 1% of their body fat or body weight is, a pound and a quarter, that's not going to be sustainable weight loss that's going to actually hold for the long term, even if compositionally our macros are controlled enough to be able to get muscle mass held. We are not going to be able to hold that weight down very easily. We can absolutely do it, but you have to be incredibly careful and use reverse dieting when you get back down. And the end goal for most people, and end goal for anyone I work with, is going to be intuitive eating, trusting the body to know the needs and trusting yourself to be able to make choices to adequately care for your body. However, when you do extreme diets like that, intuitive eating is incredibly difficult, and doing a reverse diet is almost imperative if you're actually going to hold the weight off. So kind of a side tangent on that whole dropping weight topic. But when we look at what is happening when we drop weight, then we move into more of our macros. So same thing, when we got a deficit, that's going to be affected by our macros. Our surplus will also be. We can gain straight up muscle mass with a tiny bit of body fat, or we could gain all body fat. So a surplus essentially is when we have excess calories beyond our caloric needs, and our weight will then go up. All right, so let's talk composition. That's going to be our macros. Our macros are going to be our 3 calorie-containing categories that our body needs in high volumes, and it needs all 3. So I know there are people who are like, well, I've taken out carbs and I was totally fine. Our body will create carbohydrate energy in its own ways if you're not actually giving it. However, it is a lot more effort, so there are negatives to that. However, your entire life was not gone without carbohydrates. The required functions of creating tissue, of being able to regulate processes through those micronutrients, those were all required. So it's a good thing we do have this thing. Specifically as a child, when we're growing, our carbohydrate needs are much higher. Okay, so let's start with carbohydrates, because that is going to be our main energy, easiest source of energy for the body. So this is going to be in the form of glucose. Anytime the body is going to be low in energy, this is going to be the first craving you're going to have. So you're going to sense craving of carbohydrates because the body is looking for an energy source. So that's going to be where it's craving. This is going to be a storage point. So we're going to have available, readily usable glucose. And then we're also going to have muscle storage of carbohydrates in the form of glycogen in our muscle. This glycogen provides energy when we are lifting, when we are contracting our muscles, and when we're trying to perform a movement. So having adequate carbohydrates around a workout is critical to be able to actually have that power and output to make explosive movements, or simply just run around the house for sustained energy. The brain also runs off of glucose. So glucose is the preferred source for the brain. It can run off ketones in the very worst case. Again, like I was talking about, your body can convert and go toward a source like ketones if there is no carbohydrates available. However, it is not preferred. Glycogen, on the other hand, cannot be produced in any other way. So if you do go on like a keto diet and you remove carbs, you are removing that storage carbohydrate form in the muscle, and that can have negative consequences on training. So 130 grams is the standard glucose requirements for the average human brain. So keeping that in mind in your day-to-day life, cognitive, just being able to have focus. If you notice a lot of brain fog after you start to eat, sometimes it can be the quantity of carbohydrates. So maybe you got just enough where your brain is really trying to build a runoff of that, but not quite the adequate amount, or your source of carbohydrates is limited. Okay, and then the other part is carbohydrates is going to be one of the best sources of our micronutrients. So if we think fruits, vegetables, those are all in our carbohydrate section, and our whole grains, those are going to be rich in vitamins, minerals, and specifically fiber. So aids in digestion, maintains a good healthy gut biome. It provides all that good prebiotic that the bacteria can then feed off of to maintain a good regulatory system. So if anyone's been on a keto diet, you know that having regular bowel movements is quite a challenge because you don't have both the bulk. It also helps to manage our cholesterol by having that fiber content, specifically our soluble fiber that helps absorb cholesterol. So overall, super important. It also plays a role in body fat breakdown and the actual removal of fat cells from our body. So being able to have carbohydrates is absolutely imperative to be able to keep us in a healthy spot. As far as calories go, we get 4 calories for every 1 gram of carbohydrates. So that does mean that we can get higher volume foods and keep us fuller by utilizing carbohydrates. So you can have your 2 forms. You're going to have the simple and you're going to have complex carbs. Our simple will be a lower fiber carbohydrate, and then our complex will be a higher fiber. So our whole grains, our vegetables, you'll have non-starchy and you'll have starchy. So you're going to have a potato would be a starchy carbohydrate, and then our non-starchies could be our broccoli, asparagus, things that are going to have very low caloric values, but you can have a lot of volume from it. So an important key with carbohydrates is simply getting the variety and looking at the sources that it's coming from. So next would be protein. It's going to be the same 4 calories for every 1 gram. Everyone knows protein's the building blocks for muscle, and it is. Proteins are made of amino acids, and there's going to be 20 forms, 9 essential. So 9 essential just means that our body doesn't synthesize naturally, so we have to get it through food. So if you are someone who is on a vegan diet, this is going to be a key part of this. We need to make complete proteins, so you have to be a lot more aware of what protein sources you're getting and whether they are complete forms. Having adequate muscle or adequate protein will make sure that we can maintain the muscle we have, build and repair the muscle that we're trying to get to happen, as well as maintain good immune systems cells. So our protein will work with cell regeneration and cell creation. So our antibodies and our immune system cells are going to be made up of protein. So our immune system support, keeping protein high, will be super important. Also think about cells being our skin. So collagen is another amino acid, creatine, things that are going to make the skin quality, the nail quality, the hair quality, all those things high, will be benefited through protein. You're also going to look at enzymes and hormones. Our proteins are going to be responsible for the production of enzymes, and that facilitates the biochemical reactions and hormones that regulate various bodily processes. So some examples of protein is going to be our meats, chicken, beef, turkey. Our fish, we're going to have eggs. That's going to be both some fat and protein in there. Dairy products, similar. We're going to have some carbohydrates, fat, and protein. Tofu, again, some carbohydrates and protein. Legumes, some carbohydrates and proteins. Nuts, going to be carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. But you can get it from that mix. So if you are looking to build up protein in your day, a good tip would be looking at combos. So you can do a whole grain bread, which would have a little bit of protein. You can do the legumes, so your beans that give you a little bit of protein there. So you're not having to do a whole ton of meat if that's not something you enjoy eating. All right. If you do find that muscle is dropping and you're not in a extreme deficit, increasing protein is a good way to make sure we're maintaining the protein we have. And side note, if we are continuing to drop muscle mass and we know that we're not dropping weight dramatically and we know that our protein is there, we need to look at carbohydrates and the timing around workouts. So making sure that protein and carbohydrate timing is key around making sure recovery happens. And then lastly, we're going to get fat. So that's going to be a highest calorie count per gram, which will be 9 calories. So if you ever looked at a cup of rice versus a tablespoon of olive oil, they're the same calories and it's unfair, or a little bit different, but it'd be 2/3 of a cup of rice for a tablespoon of olive oil, equivalent calorie wise. However, it's a different volume. It's a lot easier to consume that, and it's a lot easier to see it hidden. So if you have, eating out, that's typically a hidden fat store. just in the cooking. It makes the flavor better, and it's a great way to get people to really enjoy the taste of things. But all that aside, fat is super, super important for our daily needs and survival. We require fat to absorb fat-soluble vitamins. If our fat-soluble vitamins do not have fat, it does not transport well into the body and it doesn't absorb and get utilized by the body as well. So we must have that. We also use fat as a fat storage form for those fat-soluble vitamins long-term outside of the liver. And then it also provides a energy reserve for those periods when we do have reduced intake. So if we are under in our fats, we typically will store more because our body is in a depletion. So if you're in low body fat, extremely low body fat, your body will typically want to fill that because it is, again, that resource reserved energy. The other thing is going to be important for some lubrication for our colon walls to keep us regular there. So if you've ever been super, super low fat, your bowel movements could be a little bit tough to pass. It's also going to be really crucial for cellular membranes and maintaining cell integrity and function. Super important for cognitive function. So our fish sources, our fatty acids, omega-3s, omega-6, you can also get from plant sources like flaxseed, chia seeds, those type of things, are going to be super important for brain health. So if you notice some brain issues with clarity, or you're not able to function or focus at the highest level, we could really look at those omega-3 fatty acids. Those would be, again, like in that, those salmon is going to be a really high source, walnuts, flax seeds. So memory, mood regulation, our hormone regulation, all that's going to be a big part of fat in our diet. So again, we talked about our hormones in the last podcast. We know that hormones are those chemical messengers. And if we do not have fats, it's really hard to be able to manage a good mood and reproduction of those hormones. All right, and then some examples would be cheese, olive oil, your avocado, nuts, seeds. You're going to have two different forms. You'll have saturated and unsaturated, and then within that unsaturated form, you'll have a derivative, which would be a trans fat, which is a man-made fat. So our saturated fats are going to be our plant or animal-based products, and our unsaturated fat will be our plant-based. So if you know that you're someone who just loves a lot of high-fat meat, then maybe limiting the cheese or those type of add-ons and going more toward an olive oil and avocado nut seeds would be a good option. If you're someone who just loves that chicken breast, that white meat, you can go toward more of a cheese as that fat source. But again, in everything, having a variety is just super critical. So if you're getting cheese all the time as your only fat source, then you are limited to those forms. You're going to have multiple forms of the unsaturated. You're going to have poly and monounsaturated fats, and each form is going to serve a different purpose in the body. So a variety, same thing with what our amino acids, needing a variety of those, and same thing with our carbohydrates, needing a variety of a grain, a starch, non-starch, and each form, they each serve really critical purposes for the body. So in next week, we're going to go through micronutrients, just overall what those are, the vitamins and minerals and the functions that they have in the body. Today, I just wanted to give you a brief kind of overview of what our protein, carbs, and fat are for macros. If you've heard of macro tracking, that is essentially where we are giving targets for protein needs, fat needs, and carbohydrate needs for your composition, and then essentially planning foods that provide those total grams for the day. So adjusting numbers according to the activity load that you have, the stress load that you have, the goals that you have as far as building muscle mass or just holding muscle mass, those are all super, super critical. Obviously, we can have some poor choices when we just look at macros rather than macros and micronutrients, but it's a good starting point when we do look at long-term trying to move into intuitive eating. This is a good spot to start with teaching our body the needs of portion sizes of each macronutrient, and then seeing how our body can respond to that. So if you have any further questions, or if you liked what you heard today, You can find out more on my website on insideoutnutritionusa.com or on my Instagram, insideoutnutritionusa. All right. Well, you have a wonderful rest of the day, and thank you for the time to come listen.